The worst horror movie I ever saw was fucking great.
Hello and welcome to This May Hurt a Bit. My name is James Strayer and this is...
John C. Myers.
And we're a horror franchise podcast discussing each film in popular and not so popular franchises. And today we're discussing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 from 1986. But first, we have a very special returning champion this week. He is the man behind our personal theme song, lover of Phantasm 2. And most importantly, he is here to talk about his latest musical outing, Haunted Hospital's Night Shifting. You could also say, much like Chop Top, that music is his life. So this is Michael Holloway. Welcome to the show. Welcome back.
Hey, it's good to be back. Thanks for having me for, is this number 3 or number 4?
I think it's 4.
This is technically 4, yeah.
Saw 6, Phantasm 2.
Yep.
Halloween
and
roundup.
then the Halloween special. Okay,
Yeah.
that's one.
Yeah. So make sure to go check out those past episodes if you have not heard them, if you want to hear more from Michael. But first, as I mentioned, this is also a time for Michael to chat with us about his newest album, Haunted Hospital's Night Shifting. So tell us about the disco funk Italian giallo album that you put out.
You got them all right. I think those are all the terms I like. I like to call it...
Maybe I would have switched it,
Funk disco.
Yeah, right.
I like to say something like giallo loving, goblin worshipping Itallo synth funk.
There you go.
It's definitely got a lot of synthesizers.
Mm-hmm.
It's got drum machines and it's got a lot of funky bass. Or Myers, what did you call the bass? You had an adjective for it.
Stanky, nasty.
Stanky, yeah. Stanky bass.
Yeah. So what films would you say inspired this record? Because it's so very clearly like a person who loves horror movies made this record.
So it's got the funk influence that you hear in Goblin's stuff for Argento, like Deep Red, Tenebrae.
Mm-hmm.
But it's more like Tenebrae in that there's a lot of synths. And you know, Tenebrae was an 80s soundtrack. Deep Red was a 70s soundtrack. This has the funk of the 70s, but kind of more of the production and other sounds of the 80s stuff.
Got it.
A lot of influence from Fabio Frizzi and his work with Fulci. So a lot of Mellotron choirs. I think almost every song has at least one section where Mellotron choirs come into it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes Mellotron strings. And Frizzi was kind of a master of employing that in, Zombie and City of the Living Dead. What's the one with the house and then the hospital at the end?
The Beyond.
The Beyond. Yeah. All those awesome Fabio Frizzi soundtracks that are definitely a big influence on Haunted Hospital. Yeah.
Do you have a particular favorite track, or is it like, picking your favorite child?
The problem with those soundtracks is sometimes the names aren't very memorable because they're just named after scenes from the movie. So it'll be like Running Down the Hallway, or like the Deep Red theme is one of my all-time favorite giallo pieces with the organs and the kind of Exorcist ripoff arpeggio, but every single horror movie soundtrack ripped off the Exorcist arpeggio after the Exorcist, right? Like that became the way horror movie themes were written was, start with sounding like the Exorcist, have an arpeggio like that kind of in a weird time signature, kind of loop at a kind of awkward place in it. And if you play it on like a synthesizer bell sound, all the better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Isn't that the famous Exorcist song is called Something Bells, correct?
Tubular Bells.
Tubular Bells. There you go.
Yeah.
And it was not a score. It was just a Mike Oldfield track from a prog rock record that he made at age 20 in England in the 60s or 70s. I don't remember when. And it starts with that bit. And so they just chopped off the intro to Tubular Bells and used it as the Exorcist theme. Now everyone knows it as Exorcist. It's actually Mike Oldfield. And the album, as it progresses from that part, becomes way more like prog rock.
I think I had that song on Pure Moods. Actually, I had that CD from real old heads will remember the ads for that.
Nice.
So as someone who has written, industrial music and then, IDM stuff and even indie rock albums way long ago, like, was there any certain like moment that you thought like, well, I'm just going to try my hand at another style of music that I like? Or is it just sort of bubbling up in you for a few years?
This has been something I wanted to do for about 3 or 4 years. My earlier incarnations of it were actually kind of proggier. They had like kind of a live drum sound and an older style of production, and it never quite came together. And then last year I sort of revisited the idea and was like, what if I do more like just straight up Lindrum drum machines? Like keep it simple, keep it just, basic kick snare on a Lindrum, lay in like the funk elements on that, and then keep it really like synthesizer focused. And again, Tenebrae is a good example of that sort of style. It has the Italian skunky element to it, but it also has a total 80s synthesizer element to it as well. And when I started taking that approach, it just took off. It just became much more like, oh yeah, this is the sound. This is what I'm going for. And then I just rolled into it from there. Myers, to answer your earlier question, a favorite song, I can't speak Italian, Apoteoso del Mistero from City of the Living Dead.
Mysteries Apotheosis.
Thank you.
I love that because that just sounds like something a goth kid in a graveyard would say, like Mysteries Apotheosis.
Totally.
And, that's also just a great tune.
No, I mean, I don't think you had told me that you did this, but, you sent John and I both an advanced copy of the album, of course. But when you hit play on it, it starts off like the first bit of music that you hear sounds like a logo screen of an old horror movie. Yeah,
logo tone,
logo tone. That's great. Yeah. It makes me like giggle in a good way. Like every single time I've listened to this, I love that touch.
And I did not invent that concept, to be fair here, standing on the shoulders of giants, but like Boards of Canada did that on Tomorrow's Harvest very effectively. The band, The Advisory Circle from England does that on every single album that I think he's ever made.
Nice.
He just inserts tracks called logo tone like throughout his albums at various points, but I think his are a little more like British TV influenced in style. There is a lot of, it's been done a lot, but the trick is to make one that's your own little jingle that sounds like your own little film logo company, and it's distinct from all the other ones while still nailing that particular feeling of, Betamax tape starting up in the scan lines. And
exactly. So I'm assuming much like the rest of your music, they can find it on Bandcamp, correct? Is that still the best place for indie musicians to put their stuff?
Yes. Definitely Bandcamp is the best. I will mention it's on all major streaming services, but certainly Bandcamp is the place to go and the place that the artists are going to benefit the most from it.
Right. I think it runs like $8 on Bandcamp or something like that?
$8, yeah, 44 minutes of music, 10 tracks, skanky bass.
Yeah. And how long did it take you to write the album ish, on and off?
9 months, I would say.
So 9 months worth of work for $8. I think that's, think that, that's $1 a month,
No, I don't know what I was expecting. It wasn't like, it was gonna be like the Monster Mash. I mean, this was pretty good, Michael, but I was listening to it while like doing some housework for the first time and just really like, this is okay.
Yeah.
Not expecting it to be as funky as it was, but very glad that it is.
Yeah.
The funk aspect is what makes it kind of worth doing to me. Like, obviously I love synthesizer music. I love drum machines and all that. And the horror movie thematic elements to it are fun, but it's all about the bass. The bass is the hook that pulls you in and keeps you grooving with it. And it's just enough phaser on the bass and just enough, like I really boosted the mid-range frequencies, like the way 80s bands did, like The Cure and new wave bands, where you really boost the mid frequencies on the bass to make it just cut through the mix and be sort of the first thing that you hear. And then it's just all about dropping a sick groove,
which is your second job, basically.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, everyone go check that out. Give it a listen and let us know what you think. And we'll let everyone know where you can find Michael at the end of the show, so you can write him all kinds of praising emails and comments and that kind of stuff after you listen to it. But until then, you know what we're here for. Not just to talk about Haunted Hospital, but to talk about
Chili.
Yes, Chili.
Dallas Chili.
So as we tend to do with some of our close friends or especially reoccurring guests, we would often just say like, hey, Michael, here's what we're thinking about doing over the next like 9 months. Do you have a particular favorite that you wanted to drop in on? And I think you jumped at Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 specifically very quickly. Why is that?
I've never seen Part 3, and I just noticed that Viggo Mortensen is in it. So I will catch up on that for your next podcast.
Yeah.
And I didn't want anything to do with talking about Part 1 because, as Tarantino said in his book I just read, Cinema Speculation, it's a perfect film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's been talked about for 30, 40 years now. And I'm just like, nope, I'm going to not.
Oh, we understand.
Yeah,
we understand.
No, I listened to you guys, and I think you did an admirable job, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
But it's too much pressure. You know?
Yeah.
And 2 is an 80s movie. You know, I love 80s stuff, and it's very 80s.
Yeah.
You know, 1986 all over it. It's more fun, and it's easier to talk about, I think. Because it's less important. Let's be honest, it's less important.
Yes. If you listen to the last episode, you heard me tell the story about renting the first one with my friends, thinking it was going to be a dumb horror movie. This was the movie we were expecting to rent.
Yes.
Right.
This was the level, just kind of goofy and violent and gory. Because, this one is way, way sillier.
When you're a teenager and your parents find out that you're watching movies with your friends in their basement called Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they think it's the opening Oingo Boingo sequence from this movie. Right? That's what they're picturing. There's a guy with a corpse strapped around him with a chainsaw standing on top of a car while rock music plays, chopping off someone's head. Right?
Yeah. Which is funny just because the all the effects in this are done by Tom Savini. They have much bigger budget. This is Tobe Hooper again directing because he just wanted to produce, but he couldn't find someone in time, and this would have wrapped up a multi-picture deal he had going with Cannon Films. So this is our first foray into Golan Globus and Cannon.
Yeah,
there's amazing documentaries about that, and so I'd recommend looking more into that. We're not going to get too much into that here, I don't think, but he did Life Force and Invaders from Mars for them, neither of which did very well. And but they still had obviously a much bigger budget for this than he did for the original Texas Chainsaw.
Right, and that budget fluctuated week to week, which has got to be infuriating because Canon ran their company by just sort of watching what their most recent films were doing in the box office or on sales, and then adjusted projects that were in production accordingly. So you could be like an art director and find out that your next payment coming in for your budget is going to be much lower for some reason. And that's going to be infuriating. You never have enough time or money on these kind of films anyway. But if you are going up and down with new numbers every other week, that's got to be terrible.
Do you have any examples of other movies Canon was releasing around the mid 80s when
Sure.
Were they horror movies? Were they?
There was some horror. There was dumb action things.
Low budget sci-fi.
Yeah. And you had stuff like Lady Chatterley's Lover, Death Wish 2, Missing in Action, Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo, Hot Chili, Life Force, Invasion USA, Cobra. Oh, they did Cobra.
Stallone.
Yeah. So just a lot of schlock, but some of which they brought stuff over as well, like stuff from Golden Harvest, like they did Jackie Chan's Armor of God. But they ended up folding in the late 80s, early 90s. Stuff wasn't making as much money, and they started getting looked into by the SEC. And so they just went, guess what? We're bankrupt, everybody.
Yeah.
Well, 2 of those movies you mentioned they did were on my list of movies your 80s dad was watching in the basement.
Oh, nice.
Death Wish 2 and Cobra. Because
his movies didn't perform very well, they also ended up bringing on a guy on set, a production manager named Hank Klein, that everybody hated. He made things so much worse for everybody, wanted to cut costs all over the place, to the point that there was basically they had no drinking water the last week of filming. It's just ridiculous stuff. Yeah. Yeah. And they also had a different guy do for the second unit directing, which is some people have to film the less important stuff. If you just need a shot of a cowboy boot, getting out of a car, a person connected to that cowboy boot getting out of a car, you might not, you don't need to send the whole main crew over there. You can send second unit people to just grab that. And that dude, Newt Arnold, really butted heads with Tobe Hooper because he ended up, he was the director of Bloodsport. He went on to go do Bloodsport, I believe. But before then, he had just done second unit stuff on other stuff and thought he was like classic Hollywood and knew more than this young upstart.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of tension with Cannon throughout the making of this movie.
It makes me wonder what the working conditions were like on this one as compared to the original. I mean, I'm sure nothing could be worse than the original, but now you're just getting jerked around like after you've been kind of a professional after a while too.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's got a lot more experience under his belt. I mean, he made Life Force, for God's sake.
Yeah, it feels worse when you know you shouldn't be that way.
Yeah. I mean, and it's also, I think, important to remember that he had done Poltergeist by now, too, because that came out in 1982, I believe.
Mm.
So he swum in the Spielberg waters. And yes, Tobe Hooper did direct Poltergeist. Let's just, I think our podcast can plant our flag there and not be a part of that internet rumor mill. But so he's come off working with Spielberg, then had 2 bombs. And now he's kind of gone back to the Chainsaw Well.
And he was supposed to, like, there have been different conversations about revisiting this for a while and different versions of it. But this time he did not work with Kim Henkel and instead worked with L.M. Kit Carson, who also co-wrote Paris, Texas.
Oh, my goodness.
Which is a bizarre combo, and like was kind of excited, though. I saw an interview with him where he was kind of excited to like get off the hot screenwriters list. The way he made it sound, he was like, I don't want to be like that Mr. Important guy. Yeah. And the initial script that they had for this was a lot more satirical than what ended up the yuppies at the beginning. It was a lot more of that going after yuppies and that kind of stuff.
Right.
They were rewriting stuff on the fly. They just kind of would sort of wing stuff on set and then Carson would write it down later.
Oh, Jesus.
Like there was like something like, we're on the last shot of the movie. What are you doing? I'm writing last week's stuff.
Yes.
It wasn't necessarily, they didn't have a script.
It fits right in with the zeitgeist of mid 80s horror though, which is that it's goofier.
Yeah.
There's more of an emphasis on having fun, on everything being a little over the top, everything being a little zany. And obviously that makes it feel utterly different than what it's a sequel to.
I mean,
but it also fits right into the period in which it came out and the horror movie realm in which it came out in 1986.
Yeah. And it's not, I mean, I was going through some of the series that we've done and like, it's a thing that I kind of enjoy where the second one gets goofy with it. And like there's certainly with Basket Case, Silent Night, Deadly Night, stuff like that. Like it just gets a little sillier because maybe you have a little bit more budget and can get a little loose with stuff, or it's basically what's the history repeats itself. First is tragedy and then is farce. And that's sort of in this one in particular.
Oh, man.
Texas Chainsaw is tragedy. And then Texas Chainsaw 2 is just a farcical version of that.
It's funny, too, because you immediately hit play. And I would love to hear from any of our listeners who are watching the first Texas for the first time and then rolling right into part 2 for the first time. Especially if you do it in like the span of a few days or something like that. But like the opening shots of part 2 are just like these yuppies screaming down the highway, drunk, shooting a pistol at signs. Yeah. And wrecking mailboxes to like, to music. So it's already feels completely 180.
Well, it's also just like those people feel so different. In the first one, you had this van full of, these archetypes who didn't know them all that well. But they were they were seemingly nice people. They're talking about astrology and just seemed, with the exception of Franklin, rather friendly and warm-hearted. And these people are just buttholes.
Loathsome.
Yeah.
They're very awful.
And they've got a car phone, which makes them a certain type of person in the 80s.
Because that's the, there's this story of the first one where Hooper got the idea after like trying to leave a Macy's or something and wanting to change the crowd. And basically Kit Carson had the same response where he was like somewhere and he saw a bunch of yuppies and he was like, that's who should be murdered. These people.
Well, there's a full deleted scene, which we might have gotten to later, but there's a full deleted scene where a bunch of, they're more like frat guys than yuppies, but they call it the scene yuppie scum. Mm-hmm. And the family goes down and they're at some sort of like sports celebration or something like that. And the family is out to collect fresh meat for the night. And it kind of like derails the whole story. And I guess that for pacing issues, they took it out, but you can find it on YouTube, and it's a very raw form of the scene. So it doesn't look all that hot.
Yeah. It looks like it's from a tape.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the Vinegar Syndrome 4K and Blu-ray like has that on one of the discs, and I was watching those. It also has a scene with Joe Bob Briggs that got cut, which I'm really glad they did. Like, it was fun. It's Joe Bob, whatever, but it's a little too like self-referential and on the nose. But I could see why they took it out.
Self-referential and on the nose is kind of the story with this movie, though, and we'll talk about the third act later. But
true, but I think it was a bridge too far. I still understand, like, for pacing reasons, I think it's fine that they cut it. They did cut a lot of other stuff, though. Like, initially, like Dennis Hopper's character, because he just gets sidelined. Like, he's really like barely in this movie, but like they had a whole thing of like when Stretch first meets him at the hotel that he was just having like a mescaline nightmare of chainsaws like coming through the well.
That's a weird cut.
Yeah, that's why he looks so.
Because the last time we saw him, he looked very normal and he was just in like a car talking to other police officers. And then the next time we see him is in his hotel room and he looks awful.
Yeah.
And you have no concept of like, what just happened to him? Why is he so out of it now? And I always felt like, oh, there's a missing scene here. There's something that we don't know about him.
There was also supposed to be a whole thing where he knew Stretch, like he ended up setting up Stretch's mom to be bait to arrest Stretch's uncle in something years before. So it's sort of this like circular thing that, oh, now he's doing that to the daughter as well, using her as bait to get the Sawyer family.
There was another version where I think he was like her father or something like that too. Yeah. So a lot of rewrites on this one. From that opening bit, you know, I do love the body, which you later kind of put together as the hitchhiker's body.
Nubbins.
Yeah, Nubbins. But
Nubbins
like
Sawyer.
But Leatherface just using him as like a marionette in front of him. And it's, I know it's more fun and it is a little cheesy, but there's still something a little uncanny about it to me. And I think it's just shot so well.
Absolutely.
Like,
it's an amazing sequence. And to me, it is all about how Nubbins being held by Leatherface in whatever way he's stapled to him or I don't know what, but the way he's just looks like he's dancing. I mean, he's standing on top of a car. Oingo Boingo is blasting the car or a truck. The truck is moving down the highway on a bridge. You know, a chainsaw is going and this guy Nubbins is just dancing. That's what it looks like to me. Just a corpse dancing on top of a truck. And they say later that they were going 90 miles an hour, which didn't quite look like it, but still this idea of like, it's hallucinogenic, you know, it's like nightmare. It's a nightmare fuel, but also hilarious at the same time. I think it's a great intro.
Yeah. That like Hooper had said that he wanted to ratchet up the black comedy that he thought was in the first one. And it not only is just straight up sillier, but I think it's shot and handled in a way, the tone is a lot different. So some of the stuff that's like really heinous doesn't feel as bad. Because you think about like, and we'll get to it later, like what happens with LG or whatever.
LG
is awful, but it's all just like, whatever. It doesn't really feel as bad because it's still, I mean,
I thought it was pretty awful.
But I think it's, I think just some of the cartoonish gore and all the stuff around it lessens that a little bit. It is, I think it just doesn't have the same kind of punch as the non-violent, like, you know, you weren't seeing any of the gore in the first one really. And that one really was much more effective for that. But because this one's just such a carnival, it's fine.
When Leatherface finally gets the chainsaw into the car, we get a first real Tom Savini effect, which immediately offsets the movie from the original because it's like just a full-on chopped off head spurting blood. And
all this is happening, this attack is happening while these two guys on the phone are calling a local radio station, and it's DJ Stretch, played by Carolyn Williams. And I got to tell you, that radio station, their phone policy is awful. Because they have it for some reason, like she can't hang up on them, they have to hang up.
This is called a plot device. I know,
but
it's a pretty cheap one.
I mean, like that's like, I know like that, like telemarketing, because Omaha, Nebraska was the telemarketing capital of America for a while. Like you weren't supposed to hang up on them. You weren't allowed to, but it's a radio station. Like you're just asking for trouble.
Yeah.
And they got it. They got it. So I think this is a polemic against bad phone policies.
Right.
Obviously for the plot, they want to have the murder recorded. The radio station is on the phone with the people who are getting murdered and it's a live call. It's being recorded. I get it for a plot device. It becomes very, very important to the entire story, but I never buy it. I never buy Stretch and LG getting all flustered in the radio station. Like, oh, how do we cut him off? How do we cut him off? I'm like, there is no radio station on this planet that can't cut off a caller.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we had radio show in college, and we had people calling us all the time that we would just cut off, right? I mean,
all two people asking for Ministry's Just One Fix.
Right.
Was one of them Al Jorgensen?
Right. Passing through. But yeah, they call into the radio station. We get our main character. There's not a group of teenagers necessarily, but we get our final girl, I guess you can call her, Stretch, and her compatriot LG at the radio station. And when they do first go into that scene, they are playing the Cramps, which I enjoyed. Yeah, she is stuck in this situation hearing the murder on the telephone, and she says that she's not able to hang up on him, which is ridiculous. But then she ends up taking that tape to Dennis Hopper. Lefty, yeah. Right.
It's wild as this starts up, because like you were talking about with the going down the street, and it's these jackasses, how different it is from the first one. Even that first opening crawl is like, it's not John Larroquette, it's just some guy.
On the afternoon of August 18th, 1973, 5 young people in a Volkswagen van ran out of gas on a farm road in South Texas. 4 of them were never seen again.
Yeah. And it already just feels like a movie. You know what I mean? Versus the first one, because it just feels like, well, that's what that guy would sound like. Get a guy that sounds like a voiceover guy. Do that. Here's Oingo Boingo. Here's Timbuk 3, whatever. Put those in our movie. So it already like doesn't feel as evil as the first one. And I also like that when the car accident happens, because you don't actually hear the car accident. You see the song and whatever. But then the car accident happens over the phone, and then when it cuts to the aftermath, they just basically took a wrecked car and jammed it up under an embankment. Like there's no sign of any damage done to anything. And I thought that was kind of a clever way to do it, because I didn't really think about it until like my 4th or 5th watching of this movie. But that is where we're introduced to Dennis Hopper as Lefty, the very cartoonish Texas Ranger who's been following the Sawyers and is putting together that all these disappearances that have been happening across Texas are related, but no one believes him.
So when she does take that tape to him, is that where we find out that he is, or is it later, he is actually the uncle of Franklin and Sally? Yeah. I can't remember when it's
pretty early on.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty early on.
Right. So it might have been that, because I think they do mention something in that first scene with him. It's just like, I've got a family connection or something to that effect to it. So this is personal for Dennis Hopper.
But he also has this weird religious angle going on that isn't clear. He really seems to be like a God-fearing Christian who both wants vengeance simply because some family members were killed, but also clearly thinks it's like his moral imperative to do this.
Yeah.
And that he has like, God willing him to perform this act of like taking out these cannibal murderers.
Yeah, fleshing that out, it would have been a bit more interesting, I think.
He's on a mission from God.
Hopper's great and he's intense and he's exactly what he should be, but it's a very, very thinly drawn character.
And unfortunately, like they were under the gun to finish this thing. Like I know when shooting ended and they had to go to post, they had to do it very quickly. They had a drop dead date because Canon at this point was already struggling financially. They had about like a $5 million budget. $4 million was coming, much like Maniac Cop 3. $4 million of it was coming from Japanese investors, and they absolutely had to have it by this time. Otherwise, they wouldn't get that $4 million and have the movie essentially be paid for. So they were like, you are done at this particular date. So I think there was a lot of just like rushed cutting. For a while, because they'd also, when it was initially released unrated, they got rid of some stuff to try to pull that back as well, because that was death for a movie. You were very limited to how much you could be released if you didn't have like an R rating. And we know, he was shooting for a PG.
It cracks me up. And he was also like really trying to saw the length down from 100 minutes to 90 minutes. So they could like play it a few more times at the theater, or like get one more screening in for the box office. Yeah, so Stretch is at the hotel room with Dennis Hopper just talking about, I've got this tape, I've got the whole thing. She wants to get this information out to the newspaper, and she does say something that I took offense to.
No, I'm already right in the middle of this. This is my chance to stop playing headbanging music and do something real.
I knew you were going to call that out. I had the exact same reaction. I was like, I could say something about this, but I bet Jim is going to beat me to it.
You're damn
Which
right.
is, what's wrong with her being like a schlock rock DJ? Why can't she play headbanger tunes?
At the time, it would have been like hair metal, even, you know, like I doubt that they were playing like early Slayer or anything like that on the radio, but like it would have fit a little bit more if she was into that. She wants to chase
her real radio dream, which is covering chili competitions. She's inexplicably a reporter.
Texas area chili cook-offs.
Yeah, because the reason she's at the hotel is there's a chili cook-off happening there. And in fact, before we're introduced to the scene with her and Lefty, that's a little cameo from Tobe Hooper as the guy that like walks across the screen and like throws his can at people. Tobe Hooper is never without a cigar and a can of Dr. Pepper, apparently. So yeah, after that scene, she goes down and there's a Texas chili cook-off thing happening, and the winners of it are the Sawyer family. Apparently a repeated winner because he's a big favorite. And I mean, this just, if you weren't convinced now, already what a goofball movie this is, like the way they dress the cook in this one.
Yeah.
Like just his jacket is so loud. I don't know. He's just very comical looking already. Like people are like, what's the secret to your chili? And
no secret. It's the meat. Don't skimp on the meat. I got a real good eye for prime meat.
Do you have an opinion when it comes to chili about beans or no beans?
You know, I think I'm pro bean.
Yeah.
Apparently Texas, no beans.
Wow.
That's Texas style. And they're apparently like, that's the real kind of chili.
And water?
Yeah. If you don't have beans, you just got wet meat. That's it.
Yeah.
Put some beans in there. Because I've been yelled at before for my chili not being show chili. Because you don't put beans in show
bitching
chili.
At you about not having show chili.
I'm taking notes here, man.
Yeah, it's gotta be.
You don't put beans in show chili?
Apparently this is what, well, this person is from Texas, so they have opinions about it, but I'm sure it's like barbecue where everyone has like, no, this is the best kind of barbecue, and North Carolina does a terrible job at it. Who knows?
But yeah, you got black beans and kidney beans, and
I don't think black beans go in there. I think it's pinto. I think it's kidney.
I think it's more kidney or
kidney.
But,
yeah. Okay.
I'm open to it. I'm just saying
for cannibals,
absolutely.
Maybe some real kidneys.
Oh, kidneys, yeah.
Which, if you notice in the radio station, there is not only the poster for Fine Young Cannibals, but there's also that infamous Beatles picture with like they have all the dolls full of like meat and blood around them.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, this comical display, but I kind of liked seeing the cook just out in his element too.
Yes, yeah.
You know, him being kind of like a funny, charismatic type of guy.
It's also one of the only scenes in the whole movie where you just see the world existing in Texas, right?
Yes,
like
sure.
All the other scenes are set pieces. There's the radio station set piece. There's the Texas Battleland set piece. And this little part in the middle, just really short too. Like, is the only time you're like, oh, they really are in Texas. There really are Texans around. And what do? They have chili cook-offs.
Yeah.
And they award this cannibal guy their, gold medal or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it just, if it's funny and it feels real and it makes the movie feel a little more lived in, a little more organic.
Sure.
And I think that's important. Otherwise it would just feel like a set piece horror.
Right. Because I mean, like, and because the first one is they're so removed from reality, and they make it a point in this one to sort of connect them more with the world around them, the Sawyer family, and spend more time with them, which, because you couldn't keep them as mysterious and outwardly as they are in the first one. But the fact that this has the opening crawl that like, oh, there was no sign of anything there.
Right.
When the cops would go look. Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. Like you just go, okay. There
that
wasn't,
human bone couch is, they
just, the house just disappeared. They just moved it, I guess.
The opening crawl basically contradicts itself too in a weird fourth wall way where it's like, it was as if the Texas Chainsaw Massacre had never happened, but it's clearly conceptually just referring to the movie, because then it immediately says, but lots of people were getting chainsawed to death throughout Texas for years afterward.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, oh, so it did happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is it, bud?
But I also just like the idea that the local authorities are like, yeah, that happens sometimes. Just like moving on.
Accidents.
Like, I don't know what Texas was like in the 80s, but if that was just a regular thing.
Well, either way, there was no beans in their chili when those people were getting sawed up.
That's all they cared about. They're like, it's all right. Well, his head is no longer on his body, but were there beans in that chili? Okay, he's all right.
Yeah.
We'll there was beans in there. This was clearly self-inflicted.
Fuck that guy. Yeah.
He realized he blasphemed.
Right.
And I'll say this, at that chili cook-off, when we were introduced to it, LG, her buddy, who was actually a guy who worked on the first Chainsaw, not as an actor, but he was an actor in this one, makes her a little fry house. There are
a huge fry house.
There are way too many fries, and those fries look disgusting.
Yeah.
Those fries look wet and limp. No thanks.
Baskets of fries to build a fry house.
Do either of you have any chili tips? Chili recipe tips? Secret tips?
We're never getting off the chili, are we?
Now I'm just
stay right here.
Really
you want to cook that stuff a long time.
I do have a tip.
What?
Pumpkin chili.
Pumpkin chili.
That is good. I've had pumpkin chili.
Put a can or two of pumpkin mix, or just pure pumpkin right into it. It's excellent.
In place of meat or alongside the meat?
No, just as an additional ingredient.
Okay.
Just pumpkin up your chili.
Make it around chili. And then
Michael wearing a big floppy hat having pumpkin spice chili. All right, that's fine.
Then you take your jack-o'-lantern, but don't carve anything to the sides, but like carve it out and you put all the pumpkin chili in that.
Yeah, you have it like soup, like in Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, you
I
serve
don't sanction this.
Yeah,
no.
Yeah. Anyway, listeners, let us know your hot chili tips as soon as you can. Next scene after the chili, we get Dennis Hopper going chainsaw shopping, and I really love
great scene.
Yeah, I really love a shop that has literal walls of chainsaws that you could be interested in, and that had to have been so much fun to set decorate.
Well, that guy owns that shop. The chainsaw owner is the guy, and because they needed a butt ton of chainsaws for a bunch of different stuff they were doing, and he needed doubles of stuff, so he made a ton of money off of them and was happy to just be like, whatever you guys need, I'm happy to help.
Yeah.
And so they shot some stuff there, and it's so funny because Dennis Hopper, he's on the proprietor's on the phone with someone else, and Dennis Hopper like just lays out a bunch of money. It's like picking up different chainsaws and like feeling their weight, and then he ends up selling them. And Dennis, he's like, we got a log out front you can try on, and Dennis Hopper is just slashing away at that thing.
Yes.
Not
and
very
the owner
safely.
of the shop gets really excited about it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. He's unsure at first.
He's like punching in the air. He literally says, "Oh, my aching banana." I had to turn the subtitles on and rewind it and watch it 5 times. He says, "Oh, my aching banana."
I mean, is that like a sexual innuendo? I kind of don't want to go there.
I think so. I think his kink is like improper chainsaw handling.
Yeah.
He's so buttoned down.
Right.
He teaches people sewing, and someone like does it bad, he's like, "Oh, haha."
You do get the famous, and I sometimes I hate calling this kind of thing out, but just the famous GIF of Dennis Hopper with a chainsaw in each hand, just testing them out. That's a popular internet GIF and meme right now.
Well, he apparently like told the one of the art department guys like that you've made me look perhaps the silliest I've ever looked, but this predates the Super Mario Brothers movie.
Yes.
So, this came out the same year as Blue Velvet, which is so insane.
Wild.
Yeah.
Man. Right. Okay. So, Dennis Hopper is now all lousy with chainsaws. It does sound like when he's hacking, did y'all notice that some of the music from part 1 started seeping into there? And I like how they were just sort of like mirroring, like, it could have been like a red herring type of thing, but like, will he become some sort of like murderer now that he's feeling the chainsaw?
Going back to that, Michael, how do you feel about the theme to the Chainsaw Part 2 by Tobe Hooper and Jerry Lambert?
I was hoping no one was going to ask me that because I can't say anything good about it. It's a weird score, and the whole thing sounds like it was done on like one keyboard with basically 2 different sounds on it. One of them is like MIDI strings, and the other one is like a clown honk.
I'm a fan of the clown honk.
MIDI strings and clown honk is a great detective show.
And a toy organ at best, and it does really old-fashioned riffs. It's all this like really fast organ grinder type buildups, and it never really feels like a complete score. It just kind of feels like hammy, cheesy MIDI Casio strings and organs and clown honks, and it's goofy as shit. And I can only think this was a very deliberate choice. They knew what they were doing. This is what they wanted, but it's a little distracting.
Well, it's for me, it sounds a lot like the theme for Final Sacrifice. That kind of like dun 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 that just doesn't go anywhere. It's a lot like more kind of like Richard Bandier almost.
But Richard Band at least had an orchestra and was doing like more of a traditional score, but then writing, I assume you're thinking of like Reanimator, right?
Yeah.
Really flamboyant, but really catchy and busy and kind of complex and interesting with lots of energy. Whereas this does have that same feeling, but the tone of it is just like a really bright, cheap synthesizer sound doing that kind of music. And normally I would think that would be my kind of thing, right? I love doing synth versions of orchestras and other things, but in this case, it's very bright. It's very cuts through in a distracting way.
You mentioning the music made me think of that just how like jarring that the opening soundtrack is compared to like what came before. That sort of the part one, it's all like soundscapes, and this is just pounding away on a keyboard.
Yeah, the pop and rock song choices are great. I love the soundtrack. It's just when the score appears, you're kind of like, choices.
Yeah. Well, back at the radio station, Dennis Hopper reapproaches Stretch and it's like, hey, that tape you have the murder, you should play it. And he's like, that would be bad. That's a murder. And he's
that brings us to our first Skinny Puppy sample. And all of the samples that they use from this movie are in the song Shadowcast on Cleanse, Fold, Manipulate.
Yes.
Track 3, Shadowcast.
You got that last slaughter on tape. You play it on the radio.
That is such a great line on its own, too. So,
well, she bucks at first, but then she ends up doing it. And thus we have the very first true crime podcast.
There you go. There you go.
But yeah, so that, of course, they play it every hour on the hour. And that draws in. And I love that, like, people are calling in mad.
Brutal.
Yeah, it's just awful sounding. And then people are calling in, and LG's like, that sucks that people are calling in about this. We're going to get a lot of trouble. She's like, people always complain about the request. Yeah, I mean, Genesis sucks, but they're not the same as listening to a murder.
That part of the radio station thing is clever. Her being like, it's just a request, right? I'm
my hands are clean.
If people just want to complain about it, then too bad.
And that draws the attention of the newest member, or previous unseen to us, the alleged twin brother of the hitchhiker, Chop Top, played by fan favorite Bill Moseley.
Yeah. Oh, get well, Bill Moseley. He had some sort of like motorcycle or like some sort of accident recently.
I saw that.
So
absolutely.
He's doing all right.
Quick recovery.
But yeah, Chop Top calls into the cook. The cook's name is Drayton, right? It's such a weird, like, I don't know. He doesn't look like a Drayton. I don't know what a Drayton looks like, but it ain't him, But he calls in and the cook also has a car phone, correct?
The cook has a car phone. That was like, that just really, I had to sit with that for a bit. Like thinking about the first one was like, now he has a car phone. Now granted, this is like 12 years after they made the first one or whatever. Yeah. Like this is a decade later, but still it's just, they have a car phone. Like, I don't think they had it was weird that they had electricity in the first one, and now he's got a car phone.
Sawyer family's now operating at the level of Big Chili. And Big Chili brings in big money. So I mean, he can have a car phone. There's
a through line in this movie about how money ruins you and also how the small businessman is screwed. So they really just nest the psychosis of the Sawyers. They take it out of the slaughterhouse where maybe it was best served and put it right into small business ownership under the Reagan administration. Right. Yeah. This worked really well, oddly enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, as a small business owner, I feel him. I feel
They're the heroes in this.
So is it just me, or that first scene with Chop Top, which is definitely one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie, the interaction between Stretch and Chop Top in the radio station, when she comes into the room and sees him sitting on the couch, he's like the guy at the end of the party when everyone else has left and there's one weirdo who hasn't left and is just sitting there and you're like, who are you? Mm-hmm. And then he reminds me of what Beetlejuice would be like if Beetlejuice was a real guy in our actual world.
Yeah.
Just like a toxic pest, like a total creeper but also kind of a clown.
Well, what about Iron Butterfly? Inavita de Gata, baby. Oh, it's heavy. I've never been to a radio station before. Do you think you could do me a tour, huh?
I was surprised at how nasty I found him, considering I've seen this movie so many times. Like he doesn't lose his repulsion, whether it be the lighting the coat hanger on fire to then scratch at his head, that kind of stuff. It still makes me go ick. And there's many repulsive characters in horror movies over the years, but this guy still is, he's still pretty up there for as many times as I've seen this.
He's fascinatingly repulsive is what I love about it.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes him seem like an even more twisted R-rated Beetlejuice is that he has all this coiled energy to him that is going to explode at some point. And I actually think later in the movie, he loses some of that and just becomes much more of a clown and much more of like a cartoon and kind of man-child. But in this scene, he's more restrained, but very, very weird and doing very uncomfortable stuff. And it has incredible tension to it as a result, which they then follow up on very intentionally by having Leatherface just burst into the scene with a chainsaw running. But before that, she gives him the tour of the radio station and she's showing him like, oh, and here's Rubber Man, just picking up random shit off her desk. Like, here's a lamp. And he's like, oh, a lamp. And here's Mr. Rubber Man. Oh, I like him.
Yeah.
Yeah, just how it goes from like this, like, okay, well, this is awkward. And maybe you have good intentions to like just his malevolent pestness is pretty great. But then we get this big jump scare with Leatherface. And Leatherface in this one, he's so much more like energetic and agile.
He dances on his feet back and forth an awful lot.
Yeah, and this is not Gunnar Hansen. Gunnar Hansen wanted a bit more money, and they said go to hell. And,
he wanted a reasonable amount of money.
Yeah, he wanted to be paid. Yeah, and they went, what do you think this is?
This is the one bit of trivia I do know about this movie is that there are 3 people playing this Leatherface. Mm-hmm. There's like one for the close-up shots with the mask where you see the weird teeth and the lips and all that. And then like one for the full body doing stunts and action shots. And then I guess even a third guy for some other work that we see him do. But
yeah, of course, I'm sure you noticed too, the door to the record library area looked exactly like the silver door that Kirk gets killed in front of.
Oh,
yeah, that Leatherface like slams in the first big appearance. So there's a door that just exactly like that. So yeah, Leatherface appears out of nowhere, like a Jack in the Box, and LG, the cowboy buddy, comes back to the station, notices Chop Top, and here we get, my favorite Chop Top line.
Lick my plate, you dog dick.
I use that in casual conversation pretty regularly, business meetings, like that kind of stuff.
While driving.
It's a good one to say to your boss.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got both these guys.
He's the boss. He just said he's a small business owner, so he gets to send emails that are like, RE, lick my plate, dog.
Right. Yeah, I wasn't going to correct you, but
as per your last email.
I say that to clients, you want to add a shot. This is where we get the death of LG, which is pretty
supposed.
Supposed, which is pretty brutal. They do go for the twitching legs, much like Kirk in the first one.
I was going to say this feels like the first real callback because the leg twitch from the same kind of attack, right? Same kind of head injury.
Yeah.
So of course it's supposed to make us think about Kirk and reference that scene. This though, they spend a lot more time on it. This really underscores the difference between the two movies, where the Kirk thing, it's like bonk over. That's like, that's the whole scene. It's like a second. And then this is like, let's just keep showing it. Chop Top is just like, wow, just whacking and whacking. And it goes on and on. And even for me, a horror movie guy, it starts getting a little like, okay, I get it. Yeah. I get it.
And it's intercut with the other.
It's not this they do it and then Leatherface leaves to go get Stretch. It's that they do it, Leatherface leaves to go get Stretch, and it cuts back and he's still just pounding on his skull.
Yeah, so they intercut between Leatherface and Stretch and that murder sequence. Leatherface finally does manage to saw through the door and saw kind of like everything around Stretch. In that room.
He goes around to a different wall so that he can actually cut through the wall. The radio station set is really nicely done. It truly looks like a lived-in, breathing 80s radio station. And it clearly was a set, I would think, because they tore it apart with the chainsaw. So.
Yeah, because it was actually on the upper floor of where they ended up shooting all the lair stuff in the Austin Statesman press building. So
wow.
That was upstairs.
So now we get a rather uncomfortable scene that I think this movie is partially known for, with Stretch trying to evade Leatherface, and as she's doing so, her legs open up and the chainsaw is making not so subtle phallic gestures towards her. So as we were discussing last time, where the first movie is rather sexless, this movie has gone completely in the opposite direction and is more of a sign of the times.
Well, I think a couple things. She's basically like sitting splayed-legged over this like ice cooler with soda stuff in it, and Leatherface is just trying to scare her with the saw, and they're spraying water everywhere. And then like starts slowly like rubbing her leg with the saw in close up. The saw, and it follows the saw up her leg into the crotchlar area, and she starts like figuring out that might be what he wants and trying to use her feminine wiles to try to control the situation. But I do love, before that happens, that her first response is, "Are you mad at me?"
Yes, I definitely wrote that down. What a great line to ask a mass killer.
Yeah, but she's like, "How good are you?" So I think either the option is that in between the first one and this one, Leatherface has hit puberty.
Yes, or
that at that moment Leatherface hits puberty.
Mm-hmm. Because she clearly realizes that she's dealing with like a man-child or a disabled, type person, and kind of kicks into a mode of like, oh, this might be my out here.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I don't know if the allegory here is that he busts in his pants or something else, but he just starts like, well, it's kind of impotence because he can't get the saw going, and then he starts like freaking out.
Yeah,
and
I wondered the same thing, and
and then
I didn't want to wonder it, but I did wonder it.
This never usually happens, is what he's saying, like underneath there.
Tobe Hooper has another older movie called Eaten Alive with, I'm mixing up yet another one, Funhouse. So Funhouse is later than this, right? He kind of does this scene over again where the monster creature, who's very Leatherface-like because he's like a disfigured person who wears a mask a lot of the time and looks utterly ridiculous underneath the mask. But there's a very similar scene where he's like frustrated sexual desires, and then it's implied that he has some sort of release, and then he's very ashamed and angry about it, and then he sets about killing people.
Right.
Funhouse was 81.
So yeah, Funhouse would have been just before Poltergeist then.
So much earlier than Chainsaw 2. Interesting. So this is actually reprising the Funhouse villain sequence. Why is Tobe Hooper so interested in this stuff?
I don't know. Because everyone knows Dr. Pepper gives you nothing but virility. All right, now word from our sponsor, Dr. Pepper.
Dr. Pepper.
I love Dr. Pepper.
Sponsor Dr. Pepper and Blue Chew. Leatherface kind of like lets her go. Because he's starting to kind of get a thing for her and basically, I don't know, lies, but grunts untruthfully at Chop Top about her getting out. Apparently, like there was some talk about maybe this Leatherface having like more of language, like maybe talking like a chainsaw or something like that, and didn't really pan out.
Talking like a chainsaw?
Yeah. Like going like, rah, rah, rah. I don't know. But they probably went, oh, wait, that's real dumb.
That's so dumb. But they seem satisfied with LG's body, and they just haul him right out of there. I feel like there was a moment where they're like, "Yeah, we've done good work here, so we'll take this back."
Because they were just interested in stopping her, but now they're like, "Well, now we have stuff we can make more of our award-winning chili with."
Big chili, yeah,
big chili, yeah. LG's got a little more, on him than Stretch does. So
yeah,
he's more marbled.
Then we get to the other location in this movie, and this kind of made me laugh as they were pulling up because I hit pause real quick just to see how far into it, and we're halfway in, and I'm just like, oh, we're at the secret lair for a solid half of the movie.
Texas Battle Land, theme park.
Not sure if that's a real place. Don't know.
No, it's a theme park called the Matterhorn.
Oh, okay.
And the Matterhorn is the mountain. It's just like the Disney Matterhorn, really. But we'll talk about the end of the movie later. But they go up to the top of the Matterhorn in the last scene of the movie.
Stretch follows the truck back to the amusement park, and she tries to investigate. And she immediately gets chased by a car, and of course it's Hopper. She gets out of her car, and she's being chased on foot now. And unfortunately, she was standing directly on a trapdoor, which opens and drops.
Question
in.
First, though, for both of you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Why is she following them?
I don't know.
She wants to get LG back and see if he's actually dead.
She doesn't even know they have him.
Justice.
She wasn't down there when he gets attacked. She was hiding from Leatherface.
If she can break this story, they will let her cover any chili thing that she wants.
That's probably it.
There you go.
Everything is at the service of chili cook-offs.
I think you're right, though. I think that we're supposed to read it like she thinks this is a big scoop now, and even though her life is in danger, she's going to chase it down.
But I love that she inexplicably is on a trapdoor that they have. And it falls down to this. We'll talk about the lair in a bit, but the Dennis Hopper goes to try to save her with a like rotten skeleton arm.
Love that.
And yeah, it's
what
so
could
like
possibly go wrong?
Yeah, well, it's just like the idea of like cutting to 50 years before. Some guy was like, "Would you like some more milk?" "No, I'm good." And then it cuts back and that arm cracks and falls off. 'Cause 20 years ago, a guy didn't get enough calcium. Right. But yeah, she falls down there, and then Dennis Hopper goes to get a whole bunch of chainsaws out of his trunk.
Love that.
And like he's wearing bandoliers that have extra chains on them. It's just ridiculous. But he goes in, so he's looking around at how awful this place is.
Oh, he kicks part of the wall, and a bunch of guts like pour out of it.
A bunch of guts pour out, and those were actual like butcher shop offal cast off that had been sitting in like buckets nasty for 2 weeks. And like, I guess like Dennis Hopper just almost, tossed his cookies, but professional that he was, he kept it together. And I guess they really designed that Daniel Boone to look like Ronald Reagan. So when he kicked him open, a bunch of guts came out. But yeah, so that place that stunk. So their lair that they eventually go into, their underground lair, was like where the presses were in the Austin Statesman Press, where they would print the newspapers. So this giant warehouse, and they just filled it. Basically, the set designer, all this stuff, like basically got in touch with someone like through some happenstance. It was like, hey, there's a local art school. I'm sure people would be happy to help. He's like, $5 an hour, show up and just make whatever. And people did. And so it's just full of all that stuff.
That's
and they
cool.
just like lived there. But it got like really nasty because they were spraying like Fuller's Earth and everything, which is a very fine particulate, and then blasting. It was an uninsulated building in Texas, so it would get super hot, and then they'd require an air conditioning, all this crap in the air. And I guess people were like leaving their unfinished lunches around all the places. So people were getting sick and like getting like Legionnaire's disease almost. Leatherface had walking pneumonia. It's
a very cool set, and it looks huge. Like they did a really good job of filling it up, as you just mentioned, but also just making it look massive in scale. Like you really feel the size of it. And I'm glad, because Dennis Hopper wastes so much time cutting beams down with chainsaws, being nowhere near where the bad guys are. But I can actually believe it in that place because it feels absolutely enormous. You're like, oh, he's off on the south end.
He's at the south
wrecking
wing.
shit. But they're having dinner on the north end.
Yeah, all the lights in there basically was what provided light, all this electrical stuff. And they said that they didn't have the budget to go raid all this stuff, so there was a lot of dumpster diving. And so like if we found like a sofa that had 3 legs, we would just put bones on it. And it is kind of funny as to what, going in later to what the cook kind of talks about, pushing Grandpa out of the slaughterhouse, was that you had in the first one this sort of bespoke, like this lunatic out in the middle of nowhere, like Ed Gein, making these things. And now it's this industrialized, getting some college students from the local university to build all this stuff that we're just finding. And also some of the skeletons they used were actual skeletons. They like called a medical supply company and like, give me the cheapest stuff you got. And they were not expecting like real skeletons, and they got real skeletons. They were like from India. And so they like, we actually had a casting with the skeletons to figure out where to put them.
Jesus.
I'm like, that is real grim. Like that is one of those things you probably should not have told other people, but okay.
Well, Hooper did that for Poltergeist too. Or Poltergeist as well. So he likes some real dead people on his set.
Yeah. Uses all parts of the corpse.
Right. Yeah.
I like that at this point, when we see all this stuff, it culminates the Sawyer family as these like collectors, and you realize they're serial killers and they're cannibals, but they don't get rid of anything or anyone. Yeah. Like they keep every single thing. And like there's a scene later where Dennis Hopper finds Franklin's corpse in a wheelchair. It's like they kept Franklin and they kept his wheelchair, and they took him from the town in the first movie all the way to Dallas. Why?
Yeah. And his flashlight.
Which looks a bit cheaper in this one, understandably. But yeah, it's like, how did you know that was Franklin? Did it have like "Born to Sweat" written on the side of the wheelchair? Like,
Born
it could
to
have been
Wine.
anybody in a wheelchair. Yeah. But Stretch hides basically and is eventually found by Leatherface as he is killing LG. And you hear some off-screen dialogue. This was actually taken from one of the deleted scenes where you find out that basically Chop Top's head wound paid for everything.
Kiss my plate, Mr. Big Shot. Maybe you forgot. This chrome don't bankroll this food business. No lucky with a machete, no head wound. No head wound, no fancy rolling, grilling, go-go. Ain't no fool. Kisses, don't forget it.
Chop Top makes references to like popular culture. Like when he's talking about the crime that they're playing on the radio that he has, like, what was that? The Rambo 3 soundtrack?
Yeah.
And it occurs to me, he's probably the only Sawyer that's ever left Texas. So he's like the worldliest member of that family.
Because he went to Nam.
So when he says stupid stuff like, Namland or, was that the Rambo 3 soundtrack? Like he's their Frasier. Like that's a witty bon mot because he's the most worldly to them.
Yeah.
Everyone else has just been driving around Texas.
He's seen a Rambo sequel.
He knows movies exist.
Well, in that same deleted scene, he references Lou Reed or something like that too.
Yeah, there's a bit where he's sewing up Nubbin's head and humming "People Are Strange."
Yeah.
So while he and the cook are talking, Leatherface is about to carve up LG, and I love that like
Peel that pig and slice him thick. That's my sweet meat.
I love that line.
Mm-hmm. This whole sequence is, I don't know if it's my favorite scene in the movie, but like there's something about it that is so just absolutely grotesque of Leatherface finding her. She tries to put on a face or he puts the face on her and then puts a cowboy hat on top of it. Yeah. And then ties her or like reties her. And it's like when she says something to the effect of like, it's so wet. Yeah. Like it really makes me uncomfortable.
Well, because at first it seems like he's maybe trying to hide her, which he is, but then it's also like he takes a moment.
It's multi-purpose. She looks like him now.
Yeah. She indulges some weird, creepy thing he's got going because he's peels off LG's face and a piece of his skin that he hangs up. Like you're saying, they don't let anything go to waste. So I think he was probably saving that skin. He's like, you know what I'll do? I'll write Stretch a love letter or request line. Like you'll be like on the skin. It'll be like, dearest Stretch, please play "We Built This City" by Starship. Right. What's the least song the song you would want least requested via your skin?
The face to face. I was trying to think of a face thing, but that's
eyes without a face.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
I was going to go "Tempted by the Fruit of Another." It's not a joke. I just hate that song.
Oh, okay.
And I'd be really mad if someone used my skin for that.
Oh, I love the song "Eyes Without a Face." Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It just seemed appropriate.
Right.
I always take the scene with LG's face being put onto Stretch by Leatherface and then the cowboy hat as like, he's creating a lady Leatherface.
Yes. Yeah. Like a Bride of Frankenstein sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
exactly.
So she'll live with the family now.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can be one of us now because look, I just made you like me. Now you're going to fit right in.
Mm-hmm. And now you realize that this is cool, right? Because I think it's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like the only time Leatherface has experienced anyone being nice to him because everyone is just mean to him all the time and yelling at him. But I do like that when, he has to step away for a second while she's still there and LG wakes back up. That's got to, she's still wearing the face, which I think is frankly a little bit rude.
Kind of awkward.
Yeah. But it's got to be confusing for him. He's like, if you're me, then who's driving the car?
Yeah, right.
It's got to feel strange. But I like how the first thing they have him do just to make sure that it's LG is get up and spit.
I
said a giant nasty loogie.
I wrote in my notes that like that's honestly the most revolting thing to me out of this entire like you can wear somebody's face, you can be skinned alive, just don't spit in front of me. Like I don't want to see it or hear it. But yeah, the addition of him coming back to life or awakening is such we're going to take this scene one step further. It was already pretty revolting, but now we've got a full flayed alive man coming back onto the scene. And there is something oddly touching to me when he says, "Guess I'm falling apart on you, honey." Yeah. I kind of felt that just a little bit. And then when he finally does die and then she puts the mask over his face, it's kind of like a closing of the eyes ceremonial. Like all of that actually kind of worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, it totally works. And part of it is the believability of his performance there. Like he can barely move. He wants to cut her free, but it looks more like he's doing like going to stab her, but it's just because he can't really control his arms anymore. And then he kind of figures out how to do it and actually free her. It's like, this is this guy's last act. Right. And he can barely like get through it. And I think it's pretty convincing.
And the makeup's great too. Like the exposed ribs and all that from the stuff Leatherface has already cut off.
It's funny that you get this sense that they were maybe like, man, for a Texas Chainsaw movie, this doesn't have a very high body count. They're like, I got an idea. Let's kill LG twice.
Right. There you go. So after that bit, she wanders into just a huge set. This is what we were referring to earlier. And, you know, the three in the family are just arguing and screaming at each other, as you do in these movies. And, you know, the cook just can't get a break still. Meanwhile, upstairs, Hopper is still sawing at support beams.
He's weirdly unconcerned with like where he is in proximity to anyone else or anything else.
He's like, the beams are going to fall on him.
I'm just going to saw beams. It's a little rude too, because he knows that Stretch is captured and somewhere there, but he isn't really looking for her.
Yeah, he's willing to sacrifice her for the greater good. I think if you spent a little bit more time making him, you know, maybe that deleted scene about him kind of being this spiraling, like Death Wish kind of guy, but this just seems like I want to get these dudes. I guess I'll kill myself in the process. Mm-hmm. It doesn't totally hang together that well.
Maybe if we would have explored the religious angle a little bit more, like if I die, you know, the good Lord will take care of me.
Am I the only one who sees this set and thinks that it had a huge inspiration on Dan Aykroyd's Nothing But Trouble?
Oh, absolutely.
100%.
This feels really similar, right?
This and, of course, House of a Thousand Corpses, which feels even more blatant. But yeah, Nothing But Trouble as well.
Yeah, I try not to think about Nothing But Trouble, but it happens.
Of course.
Chop Top is now running around with the hitchhiker body again as kind of like a marionette, so he's back. This is at the point where Hopper finds Franklin's skeleton. I don't know if this is where it's actually revealed that this is where it all comes together. Again, we said it earlier, like he has family members involved, but he definitely understands that this is Franklin, I suppose. At this point, Sally is running around. Like, I feel like they've caught sight of her now. And so Leatherface appears and starts chasing her around. And she finally yells again.
Let's talk about it. Okay, what, are you pissed off? What about me?
Which I still love her, like, reasoning, you know, constantly.
They
with
ended up giving
Leatherface.
like he's chasing her and they get caved in. And she's like, okay, let's try to reason about this again. And
I can talk my way out of this. But he seems open to her talking, you know?
So I'm curious about how you guys feel about the next part. Because the next part is where it just becomes a full-on riff of the first movie. The dinner table, family sitting around the dinner table, having the girl, the bucket, the hammer, grandpa's the best. Even the dialogue is the same.
It's very, very similar. They changed some things, as I was sort of alluding to, whereas in the first one, they kind of, they're a bit more vague about it, but they definitely make it sound like the air gun put them out of business, or like they put them out of jobs. Whereas this one, it's the grandpa was the best and that the rendering plant had barbecues for him all the time. But then they got automated, and that automation was so cold and clinical that Grandpa didn't like it anymore and walked away.
Right.
Which is different, similar, but I think a huge difference there between just like, I have these skills I can't do anything with now versus like, I like being a hands-on psychopath, not just pressing a button. And so it does sort of that kind of like industrialization, that view of it becomes a little bit different now, rather than just sort of displacing these people. They just sort of took the fun out of it.
I mean, obviously, I think the original one is far more disturbing, but this one finally does get to a point when Grandpa finally does land a blow on the back of her head. It did make me like sit up. Like it felt pretty brutal. I don't have a strong opinion of it just being a repeat of the first one. I think mainly because the set looks like so much more grand, and I'm just kind of like, just go for it, guys. Again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit bummed that it's exactly, that it is just like, oh, we're doing this again, but it's like it's just the same people doing a goofier riff on it. So yeah, I also think like the grandpa makeup is way better, but also that makes it worse somehow. Like it just seems like, oh, it's a guy wearing a mask, rather than the creepiness of the first one. And I think it's just because they spend so much time with Grandpa trying to hit the guy and like drooling, close-ups on him drooling and all that stuff, which is disgusting. That scene goes on for a very, very long time.
I like that they have Nubbins at the table which is a nice touch. Because since we realize at some point, it's never explicitly stated, but Nubbins is the hitchhiker.
Yeah.
And the corpse of the hitchhiker, and they just keep him around like a family member.
I love that. Well, they don't get rid of anything. So,
he's the one at the opening scene on top of the car. He's Chop Top is like dancing with him all the time in the lair. And then he's just sitting there at dinner. And then they turn it into like a plot point that they keep like an active grenade on him.
Yeah. Well, it's also kind of funny that when Dennis Hopper does show up, he kind of interrupts the festivities of them assaulting Stretch by arriving, and that Drayton's first response is like,
Oh, I get it. The old pressure game, huh?
Boys, you never should have been doing this.
Who sent you? Those sissies over at Del Mar Catering? That chicken shit burrito man bunch?
it's a business thing that he no longer, like, it's no longer about the act of what I'm doing. It's that you're just trying to horn in on my stuff.
Yeah.
I think is, again, the sort of like industrialization, or like, the commercial interests that are now the family's primary concern versus like just surviving.
It's also interesting that a guy who is a cannibal and like kills people regularly, the moment someone shows up and acting aggressively towards him and threatening his life, his first thought is like, oh, it's chili competition.
Yeah.
Like, you're trying to put me out of business.
It doesn't mean anything to him anymore that this is just, it's commodities. They're no longer bodies. It's just good meat.
We did briefly skip over just before Granddad is revealed is the cook does get upset with Leatherface and said, sex is a swindle and don't get mixed up in it. You've got one choice, boy, sex or the saw, and wait till Granddad hears about this. So he's not taking kindly to Leatherface becoming interested in girls.
Well, he takes kind of a fatherly approach to it. He's basically saying like, I guess you got to learn.
Right.
Yeah. Why didn't you come to me?
It's a swindle.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's, obviously they were going to get Granddad anyway, but I like the idea of Cook just being so upset. He's like, I got to tell Granddad about this too.
Right.
It's time he found out.
Also, we had talked about this in response to your previous episode, but in Texas Chainsaw, it's not clear what the relationship between people is so much, but there is, as Myers pointed out, and then I wrote it down in Chainsaw 2, Drayton Cook, he says,
On the way to the family, to stoop my shoulders, taking care of my younger brothers. It squashed the young years out of my life like a can of cheese whip.
So younger brothers.
So at least here they're confirming that these are all brothers.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and I like that little moment where he's like, I wouldn't wish this life on anyone. Like, this is terrible, but he can't ever imagine not doing this.
Yeah.
Like, he can't be like, no, I'll just like work at a gas station, an actual gas station that has gas and not horrible meat. Not people meat. He was like, this is all I know. And I love my grandpa. And the grandma, apparently. Like, this is so that we finally get a reference to a female member of the Sawyer family, because as they're about to club Stretch, these like praise to Grandma Chainsaw, Stretch finally escapes while Leatherface and Dennis Hopper have an awesome chainsaw fight.
Yeah.
Which is what you've been sort of hoping for this whole, as soon as Dennis Hopper has a whole bunch of chainsaws on him, you're like, there better be like a sword fight. You get to see
Leatherface attempt to fight with a chainsaw while having another chainsaw impaled through his stomach.
I love that shot so much. Yeah.
It's great.
And
by the way, in here is also the third Skinny Puppy sample from Shadowcast, which is when Dennis Hopper first enters the room. Drayton's upset about him being competition. He says,
It's a dog-eat-dog world, and from where I sit, there just ain't enough damn dog.
And after he does that, he chainsaws Cook right in the balls.
Right, yeah. Well,
He kind of goes right at
the
him.
butt taint area.
In the butt. It's in the butt.
that took care of my hems, I think he says. And then he really burned his beans on that one.
Yeah, really burned my beans.
Nice.
And so he's like, oh, it's just the businessman, the little businessman always gets screwed. Well, I'll show them, and finds the grenade on Nubbins. And I don't think he's necessarily planning to kamikaze his way out, but he gets surprised, ends up dropping the.
I think he
grenade.
is. I think he's planning on
seems like it, but
his way
at
out.
the same time, he accidentally drops the thing and it blows them up. Meanwhile, Chop Top is chasing Stretch out of the lair, up these hills,
up the Matterhorn.
I love the shot of him coming out of that tunnel, crawling on all fours at her with the light shining behind him. That was fantastic.
So the sequence in the shrine with the grandma reminds me a lot of Friday the 13th Part 2.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
I was just going to mention that. Yeah, because they have their enshrined grandma who's a very large mummy underneath some other creepy bone art.
Who Chop Top thinks is still alive, apparently.
Yeah, treats her like she's still alive. And there's like, unlike Grandpa, there's no indication that that's true. He has Stretch cornered in Grandma's shrine with the top of the Matterhorn, but she ends up pulling the chainsaw off of the grandma's corpse and then attacking him with it and then going insane. And you get a final shot of Stretch very far away doing the chainsaw dance. And apparently like that was like almost day one of Caroline Williams shooting, and was like, I feel very uncomfortable. I don't know how to deal with this thing yet. I don't feel very safe. You have me around the edge. And Toby Hooper was like, go the fuck home. She's like, I don't know. So I did. I don't know if I'm fired. I went back to the hotel, called my agent. My agent's like, I'll let you know. And whatever. Next day, no, right back to set.
Wow.
So I think it's the weakest shot in the entire movie.
I agreed.
Because there's nothing convincing about it. There's nothing natural about it. And you saying that, I'm like, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't look, we're supposed to feel like she's kind of losing it, right?
Yeah.
And instead, it looks like she's trying to look like she's losing it and is doing a really poor job of it. I thought maybe she just doesn't want to fall off the Matterhorn because she's standing right at the edge of it. But
yeah, I mean, it's kind of has that feeling because she's on the edge. But it's like, yeah, Carol Clover sort of brings this up in Men, Women, and Chainsaws as sort of a case for the final girl, where she, by the end of the movie, she gains their tools to use against them and sort of becomes them. It's part of the whole thing anyway. And she does, but it also seems very rushed. Like she goes through a lot of the same things that Sally does in the first one, but because the tone of the movie is such that it doesn't feel as heavy. It doesn't feel as like weighted on her as much. It doesn't, all the violence is a lot more sort of comical. And even though it is gruesome, it still feels like not real. And so like her having that response seems a little bit less, I don't want to say earned, but it just, I think it's also because it's a rehash of the first one. It just feels a little bit like also ran like, oh, okay. Yeah, I guess this is just what happens now.
I mean, it would be an okay idea if she pulled it off better. And I don't blame her for not. I mean, that would have been so tough to start off a production your first day doing that, especially considering Gunnar Hansen shot that on his final day. You know, he had been running around with a chainsaw for 3.5 weeks.
They ended up shooting it later in the production. So she did have some more practice with it, but it's still, I think it's still pretty awkward. I agree with that assessment.
Woof. Yeah.
Yeah. The dance with a chainsaw is hard. And she doesn't have the space that Gunnar Hansen had.
I think Stretch, she's great through the whole movie. I think she's a great final girl and a great performance. It's just that one sequence at the very end doesn't work.
Yeah.
I always thought too that I imagine that when she auditioned for this, she like showed up with a script and it's like, okay, which lines am I reading? They're like, no. And you can drop the script and they give her some jorts. Like, put these on. Like, okay, are you cool with being, following up Marilyn Burns' performance and his final girl in Texas Chainsaw and spending the entire movie wearing these cutoff shorts? She said yes. And like, great, you're hired.
Yeah. There is a funny bit about her doing an audition though, which is where she was told to walk into a room with Toby Hooper and one other person. I can't remember who it was.
I think it was at the time it was still Gunnar Hansen.
Oh, it's still Gunnar Hansen. So instead she just asked which door she was supposed to go through. And so she just went running, screaming down the hallway, as if she was a final girl, and ran into the room, pushed them off of their chairs and used the chairs to barricade the door, and just said like, okay, I'm ready to audition for you right now. So
we got to do this quick.
Yeah. A lot of times people don't like those kind of like, gimmicky auditions and stuff like that. Maybe not at this point, but back then I'm sure it was still a little bit more original.
Oh, it was the same for Bill Moseley too, that he had made a parody film called Texas Chainsaw Manicure. And he sent it to Toby Hooper, who loved it and is like, maybe in 14 years I'll cast you.
Yeah. Right. So when Bill Moseley got that call, he's like, who is this?
The long game. Too. Yeah. So yeah, that's our ending with Chop Top falling down that little pit. Is he still alive? I think maybe, probably not. He does get a little bit messed up.
We don't even see the explosion.
Yeah.
So anyone could be alive or dead at that point.
That's true.
Basically.
Yeah. I mean,
Chop Top gets chainsawed in the stomach a bit, but like I think it's ambiguous.
I mean, that grenade could just be full of head cheese. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So the entirety of the family and Dennis Hopper are taken out by one grenade.
Maybe.
In theory. Yeah.
In theory. Yeah.
We don't see it.
Yeah.
You know how horror movies work.
Right.
It's so much like sloppier and looser and just much more of like schlockier than the first one. But I really like this. And for loving the first movie, this just goes in such a different direction. It's so just like unapologetically goofy and
there's definitely something to it. Yeah. It feels like an 80s horror movie, but it's got an extra sort of goofy edge to it. It goes extreme. I think the LG sequence in the lair with the flame and all that, I think it's pretty extreme.
Yeah.
And horrifying. I think the movie has just enough moments that stand out like that. I think the initial encounter in Chop Top, like I talked about earlier in the radio station with Chop Top, is like one of the greatest sort of character intros of an 80s horror movie. Yeah. And then of course the opening sequence, it has all these moments that just make you never forget it. And that's, I think, what a sequel to Texas Chainsaw needed to achieve. Even if the overall tone is totally different, and even if it's a very different kind of movie, it just needs to put some things in front of you that you're like, holy shit, that's amazing. I'm never going to forget it. Yeah.
There's something to be said for that. I think particularly now where everything is so, these franchises that are so managed, like we needed to have, like there's a, they have this for Saw, like where there's a show book, there's a show Bible of like, this is the way it's got to look. This is the way it's got to whatever. To do just something completely wild for the other one, and particularly with the same filmmaker. It's not just someone else took this over, but the same filmmaker went, no, I'm going to do something very different. And I think people want more Saw and more grossness. I'll give them that, but I also want to amplify the humor that I thought was in the first one and all this other stuff. And I'd much rather you do that than be like, oh no, we just need to do the same exact thing.
Yeah.
With that same exact tone. As much as I like, if you could do that well, that'd be amazing. I just don't think that's possible. So I'm glad you just went completely the other way.
Or even like the first one, only darker.
Right.
Which I don't know if you can.
I don't think you can.
Darker than that. So, all right. Well, let's honor our dead real quick and get on out of here. Buzz Mercedes, played by Barry Kenyon, head chainsawed in half. Gunner, played by Chris Duridas, died in car crash. LG, played by Lou Perryman, beaten with hammer and skinned alive. Lieutenant Lefty Enright, played by Dennis Hopper, killed in grenade explosion. Drayton Sawyer, played by Jim Seidel, killed in grenade explosion. Leatherface, played by Bill Johnson, chainsaw to stomach, exploded by grenade. Grandpa Sawyer, played by Ken Everett, killed in grenade explosion. Chop Top Sawyer, played by Bill Moseley, sliced with chainsaw, fell into tunnel. So part 2, we loved it. If it wasn't apparent, honestly, it's been so long since I've seen part 3. I'm definitely looking forward to that one because I know 3 and 4 a lot less than I know 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. And Michael, you said you have not seen 3. Have you seen 4?
As far as I remember, I haven't seen it. I know I've seen the one with Matthew McConaughey in it, which is 4, I think.
Yeah. So Next Generation. Yeah,
I've seen that.
Yeah, so it's pretty. I barely remember 3. I know I've seen it before, and then it's just a blank space until the Netflix one.
So yeah, everybody keep watching along with us. I know a couple of you had reached out and said that was the first time that you had watched the first Texas, and I'm very, very impressed and interested that it still kind of grossed everyone out too. I'm glad it still had a punch, and I wasn't just like remembering it from a nostalgic point of view. I
have gone so far beyond like, oh my God, you haven't seen that, to being genuinely excited for people seeing something 100%. I love for the first time.
Yeah.
Because it it's because I want to experience that again. You know what I mean? Like I've seen this so many times and whatever, but
yes,
to just be to experience Leatherface all new, something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get out of here, Michael, you want to tell the good folks where again they can find your latest work?
So the project is called Haunted Hospital. The album is called Night Shifting, and you can find that on Bandcamp and all major streaming services. And if you're into Argento and Fulci films and soundtracks to them by Goblin and Fabio Frizzi, or more contemporary people doing this style of music, like today, like Umberto or Versetti Technicolor, there's definitely like a small but passionate family of people out there right now, like who want to keep this kind of Itallo horror funk music alive. And now, hopefully, my album will be entered into that canon as well.
Yeah, I love it, and I'm not just saying that because you're in front of me, but I have been genuinely enjoying this album a lot. It's been on regular rotation.
Definitely. Yeah. So, oops, shoot. I forgot.
Also want to thank Rando Rusty for reaching out again.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the gentleman who met me at the Portland Horror Film Festival, write in. I can't remember. I really do apologize. I forget what your name was. But write in and talk to us. We talked about Sleepaway Camp whenever we'll eventually get to that series. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that more extensively. Met some good people at the Portland Horror Festival this last weekend, where a film that I had a part in making played called Dark Mommy, but got to hang out with a lot of good Portland horror people. So we're out there. It was a packed show at noon on a Sunday, which heartens me, especially because it was a beautiful day out and people would rather just watch horror movies.
For horror is noon on a Sunday.
Exactly.
Right from church into the multiplex.
Yeah. Right. All right.
In June.
Yes, exactly. So until part 3, you can check us out on Instagram at This May Hurt a Bit Pod. You can email us at thismayhurtabitpod@gmail.com and check us out on YouTube at It's Hurt a Bit Pod on YouTube, I believe. And check out Michael's album. You'll really like it. And I think this week we should just end with a track from that instead of Michael's other music that usually carries us out. So here you go. Enjoy whatever track John decides to put on at the end here.
Or that Michael lets us use.
Yes, exactly. All right, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
To a new property.